This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
We have got some fun players in plus matchups across week 4 in the NFL, which could lead to some enjoyable times in the player prop streets. Today, we're going to talk to Aidan Cotter and pick his brain on how much those matchups matter when it comes to betting player props. We'll discuss which matchups he is targeting, talk about some yardage and touchdown props, and a same game parlay that Aidan likes over at FanDuel Sportsbook as well. This is Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast. My name is JimSannes. I am a managing editor for FanDuel Research, joined here, as mentioned, by Aidan Cotter. Check him out on X at AidanCotterFD. Find his work at FanDuel Research, where he is one of our writers over there. Aidan, week 4 coming up. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I got some nice rest during that snooze fest of a Thursday night game, so I'm feeling energized and ready to talk some week 4.
I'm glad that your blood pressure is lower than Al Michaels, because I thought that he was going to jump out the booth last night. Every flag that came out, I think he got closer to breaking, and we would never want a legend to retire. But at some point, I feel like for his sanity, he might need to consider it at least.
Yeah, I think really the only saving grace for that game for me was listening to Al talk about the refs and then Kirk mentioning every single college that everyone has ever been to.
Exactly. And like, frankly, he's pulling out some pretty impressive ones. I know he's on game day, so like he kind of has to have no depth, but like he never, like, I don't assume he saw a lot of Wan'Dale Robinson games. I loved Wan'Dale Robinson from like when he was like a running back / receiver at Nebraska. So like full shout out to him. But like Kirk's like depth of college football knowledge is at least makes me happy in a way too.
Oh yeah. No, I think it was Jalen Tolbert, South Alabama. That was a nice one. I did not know that coming to the game. So you learn something new every Thursday.
Did have some Jalen Tolbert alt overs, was pretty sad when one got called back for holding, but we live to fight another day. And hopefully Aidan will put us on a better path for player props in week 4. But first, I got to ask, why is there a Joe Flacco jersey behind you for people watching on YouTube right now?
Yeah, so my old roommate buddy that I've lived with for a couple of years, he's from Cleveland. And last year when the Flacco Mania started, he got a jersey. And then towards the end of the season, he was like, I don't really know what I'm going to do with this. And I was very happy to take it off his hands. It's just kind of been sitting in my closet. So figured I'd show it off.
Are you a jersey collector, or is it just that Joe Flacco transcends norms in this way?
I think I used to be. Like, I have a bunch of real old ones. I got a nice Greg Jennings one. I might have to break out one of these days from the Packers. But nah, not so much the last couple of years. But this one's just too pretty to not show off.
All right. Well, people on YouTube are loving Aidan, so the reviews are in and they are fully invested. The Joe Flacco jersey has passed the YouTube test, and hopefully it brings us some good blessings. We can get some Flacco in our lives for this week. Today, we're going to talk to Aidan about his player prop betting process, outline where he sees value at FanDuel Sportsbook for this week, and talk about an SGP he likes for week number 4 as well. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. We've already got our NFL week 4 best bets posted, had Dubs Anderson on to break down that. We also had our college football betting preview up with Kent Paget. He broke down thoughts on Georgia, Alabama, and much more for this weekend. Those both up on the Covering the Spread podcast feed and the new FanDuel football betting YouTube page. Or if you're watching YouTube right now, hit subscribe there. Leave us a thumbs up. We appreciate all of you who've been watching throughout this week, and leave a thumbs up for the Flacco jersey, specifically, not just for the content as well. We'll be going live Monday through Friday talking NFL and college football betting on the Covering the Spread side of things, and also DFS plays Thursdays, 10 a.m. Eastern, all right here on this new FanDuel football betting YouTube page. Subscribe there, turn on notifications to know when we go live each and every day to get the most up-to-date lines for the betting shows. Hey, NFL fans, you can make every moment more this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states, or 18 plus and present in DC. Offer ends or first online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. Visit MDGamblingHealth.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Now, Aidan, we've had you on the show to talk college basketball. We talked some WNBA with you, but not to talk NFL player props. So want to pick your brain on your process. Are you someone who gravitates towards a specific market, or what does your overall prop process look like?
Yeah, so like anyone else, I'm always drawn to the touchdown props. It's my favorite way to like parlay different props together if I'm not trying to just go with singles. And I feel like it's can be one of the easier ways to find value given how random touchdowns can be. And like that has its drawbacks because like last year, for example, I was in on Tony Pollard to score like way more than I would care to admit. And because he was getting all this red zone usage, we would see that week over week. And then he only scored in like 5 games. So it's a double-edged sword, but at the same time, like we know that touchdown regression is a real thing. Our senior editor, Brandon Gadula, he always does this series of touchdown regression candidates articles before the season. And one of his big guys for receivers this year was Chris Godwin. And when Chris Godwin has scored in all 3 games to start the season. So I think targeting players in high total games that have strong red zone usage is a really reliable way to get ahead in this market, especially if we can look at that regression and see that they haven't been scoring as much lately. Other than touchdown scores, I'm a sucker for receiver props. I love the position. I love like so many different of the talented receivers in the NFL. And so looking at yards and receptions, I also think that's just such a reliable way to see where usage really is. So unlike with running backs, where you're pretty much all of their usage is dictated by scheme and play calling, receivers, you have to get open to get the ball, right? Good receivers command targets. I mean, save for Wan'Dale Robinson last night. But I mean, you're going to have some manufactured touches, but it's a lot like red zone usage where players' target share tends to be pretty sticky throughout the season. And that's something where, okay, if we see that Malik Neighbors got a 50% target share last week and he only had 4 receptions, I would venture to assume the next week he's still going to see a larger target share, and that's going to even out into yards and receptions. And so you can pretty quickly start to whittle down who's like trending up or down in terms of target share and then apply that to specific matchups. But I think the biggest thing is also just attacking game scripts. So like last week was not great. If you were in on Zay Flowers, for example, in what looked like a pretty good matchup, it had a high total. The Cowboys pass defense has not been very good, but the Ravens got out to a big lead and they only dropped back like 15 times. But on the flip side, like if you had any of the Bears' primary pass catchers, they all went crazy last week because they fell behind early and they ended up throwing the ball 52 times. It didn't hurt that they were playing against Indy's terrible secondary, but trying to attack game scripts and then trying to find what usage is sticky and what is holding throughout the season is where I like to start.
I think the receiver stuff is interesting because it's so hard to model what you should expect out of a receiver because so many receivers are so different. Like Wan'Dale Robinson could have the same yardage projection as, I don't know, like we'll pick some volatile receiver like George Pickens. Like they could have the same yardage projection, but Pickens' odds of getting you 100 plus receiving yards are going to be vastly different than what it is for Wan'Dale Robinson because he can get it in chunks, and that makes a massive difference. And I think that that's one thing I like about the receiver props is I know that it's tough to model, which means that we as bettors probably have a bigger edge there because it's very much a numbers-based thing. Like you can't make all these receiver props by hand. It's going to rely on some kind of algorithm, some kind of projection, and there's going to be more room for flukiness, more room for errors, given that not all receivers are made the same. So I think that that's why, to me, the receiver market is so enticing, is because you can kind of have those things. And also like you can see usage changes that sneak a bit more under the radar. That was why I was on the Tolbert prop last night. Didn't work out, but like his snaps have been up. He was looking really good, I thought, honestly, from an eye test perspective, and he was getting some volume. So I think that you can find breakouts that haven't been, fully realized in the stat department yet, but also it's tougher to model because Wan'Dale Robinson and George Pickens may have a similar projection, but the way they get there is just so different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's looking at like where receivers are being targeted to. So looking at like ADOT, average depth of target, and then how many downfield targets the players are getting. that is really where, if you're looking for like yards, like you said, might want to stay away from Wan'Dale Robinson, but a guy like George Pickens, who we'll talk about a little later, is going to be more of that like boomer bust, has a little more variance, which, like you said, for us, can help us when we can identify those spots where we think he's going to have one of his higher outcomes.
The boomer bust guys are my weakness, and I am very okay with that personally. Now, you talked about some matchups. You talked about some game scripts and things like that. We've seen a trend where some leaky defenses have popped up, and they've been letting up really big performances. We saw both of them in the Commanders versus Bengals game. Might have that again in the Bengals Cardinals game this week, or the Cardinals Commanders game this weekend. How much does a matchup matter for you versus the other factors you listed, such as volume, such as game script, and stuff like that?
Yeah, for me, matchups are almost as important as volume. And it's tricky at the beginning of the season because we don't have a super big sample size. And we can kind of look at last year's defenses to try to get a feel for how people are going to be. But as we get into like week 4, week 5, like deeper into the season, this is where we start to get more of a feel for which defenses we want to attack for which markets. And so it goes like two ways. Obviously, like if you want to be targeting like running backs who are playing really bad run defenses and pass catchers and quarterbacks against bad secondaries, right? That's not really rocket science. But like usually by this point in the season, we're like narrowing down which defenses we want to attack. But I think the biggest thing is like trying to, like I said earlier, try to attack game scripts. So I'll touch more on the Bills later, but like early on, their run defensive numbers are pretty ugly, actually, despite them being 3-0 and pretty much dominating everyone, right? So they're 28th in schedule adjusted run defense and first in pass defense. And so like, again, that's like a really small sample, but you would look at that at face value and be like, okay, this week, Derrick Henry, smash spot. He's coming off his best game. Bills defense has struggled against the run. But then you need to think like, okay, what if they get into a shootout? Or at the same time, like if the Bills are playing a team like the Colts, Jonathan Taylor would seem like a smash spot. But if the Colts defense is really bad and the Bills get up early, you have to think about, okay, how many times are they really going to hand the ball off throughout the entire course of the game? And so they're going to get into a negative game script, which could hurt his rushing volume. And so that's the kind of thing you have to like really balance with the matchups, is like take into account what are defenses good at and bad at, but at the same time, like how are we expecting this game to go and what kind of a game script are we expecting these teams to be in?
And I think there are definitely teams that will weigh in matchups more than others. Like I think the Bills came out on Monday and they went pass heavy right away because the Jags were a better rush defense than they were a pass defense. They know what your weakness is. I think Joe Brady's pretty sharp and they're willing to attack it. So some teams more willing to adjust based on that than others. Some teams are kind of hard-headed. It might not do as much, but once you identify teams that will do that, it is pretty fun to keep track of them. Let's take a look at the yardage markets at FanDuel Sportsbook for week number 4, Aidan. When you look at the yardage props, where are you seeing value for week number 4?
Yes, we just touched on how important matchups are to prop selection, and that's where I want to attack to start off with yardage. So I'm looking at Kyler Murray over 230.5 passing yards. So Kyler's back at home this week up against the Commanders, and Washington they were one of the worst secondaries in the league last year, and through 3 games, they are also one of the worst secondaries in the league this year. They gave it the most passing yards per game in 2023, and I think they've given up the second most through 3 games of 2024. I mean, they're pretty brutal against the pass, no matter how you slice it. So we have a metric called net expected points, which is an expected points added metric, and Washington is dead last in net expected points, passing points allowed last season, and then they're far and away the worst pass defense this season. And so that can kind of lead you, okay, these opposing quarterbacks are going to have success throwing on the secondary. But I think this year, even more than last year, I'm interested in attacking this Commanders defense because their offense has been so much better. I mean, Jaden Daniels looked unreal on Monday night. And the last 2 games, their offense has been arguably the most efficient in the NFL. And so because of that, they're not getting blown out in these games, despite having really bad pass defenses, and they're able to hang out. And I would assume throughout the season, we're going to see a fair amount of shootouts, assuming this offense continues to withstand having Cliff Kingsbury as their offense coordinator. And when we look at this game, the Cardinals also don't have a very good defense, especially in the secondary. And we see that reflected in this tight spread and the week's highest over-under. So the market is expecting a back and forth game that is going to be more high scoring. And I think that's going to lead to Kyler getting a fair amount of pass attempts. So early on, Kyler has gone for 162, 266, and 204 passing yards. But those two like more mild outcomes, they came against the Bills and the Lions, who are both teams we expect to have pretty good pass defenses this year. The 266 was against the Rams, and that is a secondary that I think is a much more similar to this Commanders defense. And Kyler has typically fared really well against bad secondaries throughout the years. I mean, like you would expect. So dating back to 2022, against bottom 10 secondaries in adjusted defense, Kyler has averaged 269 passing yards per game. And I think that's over an 8-game sample. So we've seen him not be afraid to air it out against these bad defenses. And considering how strong he looked against a bad secondary in week 2, this is an awesome spot, I think, to attack the over on his passing market.
That is, as you mentioned, 230.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Over for Kyler is minus 114. And Drew Petzing is one of those offensive coordinators I would trust to take advantage of deficiencies in the opposing team. I know we haven't seen that a lot from Petzing because he didn't have the best personnel last year, but I thought he did a lot of smart things for this team. So I do trust him to kind of take advantage of those weaknesses. So we're talking about that before. Petzing is one of those guys I would tab as being a guy we can feel pretty solid about. So the yardage prop for Aidan is Kyler Murray over 230.5 passing yards, minus 114 at FanDuel. You mentioned, Aidan, that you like touchdown props. So if we're talking touchdown props for week 4, where are you seeing value there?
Yeah, so you had just said that they didn't really have as many weapons last year. And I think this year the Cardinals got a pretty good wide receiver. I believe his name is Marvin Harrison
Dortch,
Jr.
right?
I am a Dortch guy.
Sorry,
I am a Dortch guy. I have to say, that is a short king. Marvin Harrison Jr. So this morning, I believe it is sitting at plus 105 on FanDuel. I've seen this at other books, like as low as like minus 140, minus 145. Wow. And immediately when you see that kind of variance, you're like, okay, I want to attack this from one angle or another. Either like one of the models has to be off here. And for me, I believe it is ours. So we've established that this game is expected to be back and forth and feature a lot of points. And in the same vein that the Washington has struggled to contain the pass, opposing wide receivers have fared really well against them. They've allowed the 4th highest target rate and the 3rd most yards per route run to the position, and they've been scored on 9 times in 3 games. I think the next closest team has only allowed 6 wide receiver touchdowns. Like last week, we saw Jamar Chase get 2. In week 1, Mike Evans got 2 and Chris Godwin got in. In week 2, Malik Neighbors went nuclear and had a touchdown. But looking at Marv specifically, like after kind of a dud of a week 1, everyone was freaking out. He's slow. Like he's not running routes hard. He's fine. He's Marvin Harrison Jr. Like the last 2 weeks, he's had 9 catches, almost 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. He leads the Cardinals with a 35% target share over that span. And he's gotten over 50% of their air yards over the last 2 games, which is really important for big plays, especially against kind of a spotty Commanders defense. I think most importantly too, he's gotten 3/4 of their red zone targets over the last 2 games. And so that's something I'm really looking for. Like I said, that can definitely vary based on how a game is going. But the fact that Kyler is already comfortable targeting him in the red zone and he's already getting separation and someone that the offense is comfortable targeting when they get in close, that is where I really want to attack this market. And especially when you look at who else Kyler's going to have to throw this week. You mentioned Greg Dortch, not as much of a red zone threat, but Trey McBride is in concussion protocol. And based on how we've seen that go the last couple of seasons, I would be pretty surprised if he gets cleared in time for Sunday's game, which would only open up more looks for Marvin Harrison, especially when they get down to the goal line. I just don't think we should be getting plus money with Marv based on how well he's played and based on how bad Washington has been. And so with it so much lower on other books, this is something I'm definitely trying to lock in as soon as possible on FanDuel, because I would not be surprised at all if it starts to drop as we get closer to Sunday.
And especially if McBride is ruled out, we could see some movement there as well. Now, the other thing too is when Harrison had that huge game in week 2, he had the 2 long touchdowns. He also had a pair of empty red zone targets. You mentioned the hefty red zone share. Since then, 2 of those were empty targets. He could have actually had more than 2 touchdowns in that game had Kyler connected with him. So I think that Harrison does make a lot of sense. That's plus 105 at FanDuel Sportsbook right now. Any other touchdown bets stand out to you, Aidan?
Yeah, so I got to go to my guy, George Pickens, up against the Indianapolis Colts. Oh, the poor Colts. I have a feeling this is going to be one of those teams that I'm going to want to pick on for the remainder of the season.
Yep.
So Pickens is, I believe, at plus 220. He was last night when I was looking.
He is still there. Yep.
Plus 220 to score. this is probably the prop I'm most excited to play, just given
Okay.
the odds and the matchup this week. So Pickens has not scored yet this season, and his overall numbers are like actually pretty mild. But they've played 3 pretty good secondaries, and he's had to face 2 really good corners in AJ Terrell and Pat Surtain. And he's still generating a ton of separation. He still looks just eye test wise really, really good. And now, granted, the Steelers are, I believe, negative 10% pass rate over expectation. And like, that's what you're going to get when Arthur Smith is your offensive coordinator and Justin Fields is your quarterback. But Pickens still leads the team with a 25% target share, and he's third in the entire league with a 50% air yard share. So when they do air it out, they're looking for Pickens, and they're looking for him downfield where he can generate explosive plays and get yards after the catch. And like I said, like this is not out of the ordinary for an Arthur Smith offense to lean run heavy. And he has been one of the more frustrating for fantasy and for betting of not prioritizing his star players. But George Pickens is far and away the best wide receiver on the Steelers. And they're going into this matchup that is indoors against the Colts, who are a bottom 10 pass defense. They've given up the 9th most yards per route run and the third highest average depth of target to wide receivers. So they're giving up these chunk plays, these plays down the field, and they just don't have the outside corners, I do not believe, to guard someone like Pickens. And so because of that big playability, and because of how much success I think this Steelers offense that has looked pretty good, if not a little slower early on, I think they're going to have success moving the ball against the Colts defense. And I don't think George Pickens is going to lack opportunities to score and bust open plays. And considering he hasn't scored this year, despite seeing a fair amount of red zone targets and plenty of action down the field, I think this is the spot where we start to see a George Pickens breakout. And I think you could attack his props from like either receptions or yards would be my preferred way to do this.
Yeah.
But for me, getting that plus 220 on him to score a touchdown is just, I can't pass that up.
Yeah, I mentioned I like volatile wide receivers. This is the guy you got to have in mind when you think of volatile wide receivers. George Pickens plus 220 to score at FanDuel Sportsbook. And you mentioned the Colts letting up a lot of chunk gains. That's sticky because that's the kind of defense they play. It's not a 2024 defense. You see a lot of 2 high safeties. It's Colts, man. And George Pickens has 63% of Justin Fields' downfield targets this year. So they do go deep. They're indoors, by the way. It's going to go to George Pickens. So I do think that's pretty fun. Checking out the alternate markets on Pickens as far as receiving yardage, because I think that is, as you mentioned, another intriguing way to attack George Pickens. For him to get 70 plus yards, plus 175, he is plus 470 for 100 plus yards as always. Take that, for what it is, because the odds he gets there are low and the odds are long for a reason, but he would be the kind of archetype of player you'd want to target with alt markets for receiving yards because he can get his yardage in chunks, as Aidan mentioned, but the touchdown prop plus 220 is where Aidan is turning for this week. All right, Aidan, giving you a same game parlay to place at FanDuel Sportsbook for week number 4. One same game parlay. Which game you go into and which legs are you adding to that?
Sunday Night Football, Bills, Ravens. I have had this game circled pretty much since the schedule came out. Week 4, Josh Allen versus Lamar. By my money, these are the 2 best quarterbacks in the NFL, not named Patrick Mahomes. And I think this game has like game of the year potential. Like, I don't know if you remember that Dolphins-Ravens shootout from, what was it, like 2022? It was like Tua raced like a 21-point halftime lead. They scored like almost 30 points in the fourth quarter. Like, I don't know if it's going to get that crazy, but I think the potential is there with both of these offenses. And I think that's where I want to attack this from a same game parlay perspective, is because I think we're going to get points. So I'm going to start with taking the over 46.5. And that starts with the Bills offense just looking like one of the best in the league at this point. Like, you can't argue that at all. They have dismantled every defense they have played so far after, I think they struggled a little bit in like the first quarter against the Cardinals. And since then it has just been like flip the switch, pedal to the metal. They lead the league in net expected points per play and passing success rate. And they have cracked 30 points in each of their first 3 games. And like, granted, they haven't played the best defenses in the NFL yet, but they're not going to this week either. Like, Baltimore has this reputation of being a very stingy defensive team. And with this season, that just hasn't been true yet. They're 24th in schedule adjusted defense. They've given up 25 points in each of their first 3 games, even though they played the Raiders in week 2, who just got demolished by the Panthers. And so I don't think the Bills are going to have trouble scoring on this team. And then when you look at the Ravens, their offense too also has a lot of juice, right? They're top 10 in net expected points and success rate, and they're coming off probably their best offensive showing in the year against Dallas. And all three of their games totals have cleared 47 total points. And the Bills, they had 2 of their 3 go over 47, but had 2 and not gotten a concussion in week 2. We likely would have seen the Dolphins put up a few more points than they actually did. So I think starting with the over and expecting a lot of points in this game kind of leads me to my next leg, because we're trying to look for some correlation. So I'll add Josh Allen, anytime touchdown score. Josh hasn't scored since week 1. He had 2 against the Cardinals in week 1, and he hasn't scored the last 2 weeks, but they've also just demolished the last 2 teams they've played. Last week, they were basically done by the second quarter. And because of that, we've seen his touchdown odds shoot up to plus 125. And anytime I'm seeing Josh Allen at plus 125, like, that is going to be something I'm interested in, because he's arguably the biggest goal line threat in the NFL, right? Last year, he had 15 touchdowns, and like, we would expect that to regress coming into 2024. But at the same time, it's Josh Allen. Like, there are guys that perform over expectation consistently because they are just freaks of nature. And that is who Josh Allen is to me. And this year, like, he's still averaging 3 red zone rush attempts a game. That's the same amount as David Montgomery and Jonathan Taylor. Like, he's still getting those looks. They just haven't really needed him to scramble as much in these games. They've been up big. And if I'm expecting this game to be high scoring and be a little closer, and for the Ravens like hang with them, I think this is where we're start to see Josh Allen scramble a little bit more. And I was like looking into his rushing props a little bit, but the Ravens have really been a pass funnel defense to open the season. And so I think attacking him from a touchdown perspective makes a little more sense to me, where we can get that in a variety of different ways, and it plays right into the over. And then finally, for this same game parlay, if I'm trying to think of like how this game's going to go, what's the game script going to look like, trying to like build like a domino effect of these legs, I don't think the Bills, like I said, are going to struggle to put up points on this Ravens defense. And so I think that's going to force the Ravens to pick up the pace a little bit and become a little more pass heavy. I mean, certainly more pass heavy than last week when they only threw 15 times. And because they threw so little last week, all of their receiver numbers were down. And so I think this is a really nice spot to buy low on some of their receiver props. So I'm looking at Zay Flowers over 4.5 receptions. Fantasy managers who drafted Mark Andrews know that this is no longer Mark Andrews as the top wide receiver in Baltimore. Like, Zay Flowers has cemented himself in year 2 as the top target. He has a 29% target share on the year, and he had 6 receptions in week 1. He had 7 in week 2. And then last week, he only had 3 because they only threw the ball 15 times. But Lamar threw the ball 41 times in week 1. He threw it 34 in week 2. So it would not surprise me at all if he more than doubled his pass attempts on last week. And just based on a numbers game, that's going to lead to more targets for Zay Flowers. And so getting him at over 4.5, I think, is really enticing, especially because when we look at the Bills do have a good pass defense, but the last couple of weeks where they have seeded targets and receptions to is to the slot, which is where Zay Flowers typically lines up. We saw Christian Kirk have his best game of the year against them. Our guy, Greg Dortch, had like 5 or 6 receptions against them in week 1 playing from the slot. And so I think in more of a high scoring game where the Ravens are going to be forced to take the air a little bit more to hang with the Bills offense, looking for Zay Flowers over 4.5 receptions. It's a nice way to round this out.
So that's a 3-leg same game parlay with the total over 46.5. Josh Allen anytime touchdown score and Zay Flowers over 4.5 receptions. That adds up to plus 455 at FanDuel Sportsbook. And like you said, they all play well together. You want that cohesion, you want that correlation, and maybe correlation that is not going to be caught as easily by the algorithm. I think we do get that here. We're not paying a massive tax to pair the Josh Allen touchdown score with the Zay Flowers reception marks. I think that, or with the total over. So I think that does make a lot of sense. And I think the Bills can win this football game, which, like you said, would force the Ravens to throw a bit more. So I don't mind buying into Zay Flowers as well. So I think that, like you said, all 3 of these legs do play pretty well together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, like I said, I think this has game of the year potential. I love both of these quarterbacks. This is like the most excited I've been for a Sunday night game in a while.
It's going to be a banger for sure. All right, so Aidan's same game parlay again is the total over for Bills Ravens 46.5. Josh Allen anytime touchdown score, individual leg plus 125 there, and Zay Flowers over 4.5 receptions, again plus 455 for that same game parlay altogether. That is all that we have here for today and this week on Covering the Spread. Don't forget to check out our NFL Week 4 best bets with Dubs Anderson, College Football Week 5 best bets with Kent Padgett as well, and of course our DFS show here on the FanDuel Football Betting YouTube feed. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a thumbs up there and hit subscribe to get notifications as we go live each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, throughout the rest of the NFL and college football seasons. Aidan, appreciate the time. Thank you for swinging by for today. Good luck to you. Good luck to the Flacco jersey and keeping the good vibes going. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate having me on, Jim. Good luck with your bets this weekend.
All right, you can find Aidan on X at AidanCotterFD. I am on X at JimSannes. You can find FanDuel Research on X at FanDuel Research. Big thank you to Justin Lane, our YouTube producer, for all of his work on the video side of things. Thank you, Justin. And thank you all for tuning in. This has been Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast.